Not given, and it's also
It's never been
putting the squeeze. They make money on
excessive materialism and militarism. We know full well that racism is still that hound of hell.
Whenever you're in a situation where race comes up or where privilege comes up, the automatic response is defensiveness, and then it becomes their feelings take center stage, whereas it really is about having a conversation and listening. And so I try to keep that in mind whenever I feel defensive about something, because I have a lot of privilege myself. And so I think that reading about white fragilities helped me think about things that I'm defensive about. And it's kind of whenever I feel defensive about something, it's actually a reminder to myself that I need to stop and listen. Like recently, kind of an instance of this was Crazy Rich Asians. And I really loved Awkwafina's role in it. And I laughed so hard. And then I was on Twitter and people were starting to say how she was kind of appropriating Black culture. And I was like, well, I thought she was funny. And I really had to kind of stop and listen and kind of read through kind of what the critique was. And I think it's valid, but I think it's also, I just need to own that I found her performance funny, but what does that say about myself and how I relate to Black culture? So it was kind of, I think when you take you stop and you kind of take the chance to listen, you kind of come out better on the other side. So
that's interesting you bring that up, because on my previous episode, well, this will be later, in a previous episode, one of my guests talked about, not specifically Awkwafina, but about Asian Americans in hip hop culture and is it appropriating Black culture or hip hop culture, and who owns hip hop culture? And something that he brought up was that Asian Americans have always contributed to hip hop culture. And what does it mean that once you see an Asian face on the stage or in front of a camera actually creating that, and we're having this averse reaction to it, is it really because it's appropriation, or is it because we're just angry seeing an Asian American creating something that's different from what we feel Asian Americans should be, and what is our identity surrounding that? So I never thought about it that way, because for me, I always resort back to it is appropriation, and it is she is speaking in what is that, AAVA or whatever, I don't know what it's called, and I didn't think about it, because we have been invisible for so long and we remain invisible. So is it because we're finally appearing, and when we appear it's what we think hip hop culture is, quote unquote? Or is it appropriation? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but that was an interesting take on it.
Definitely. And maybe there doesn't have to be an answer. I think the fact that you're having a conversation and thinking about it is what matters. Yeah. I think it's okay to enjoy problematic media as long as you're kind of you're able to critique it.
Welcome to Now in Color, the podcast that brings those who have been erased in history back to the forefront, giving them the voice and place that they deserve. I'm your host, Sandie Chang, and I'm joined today by Christina Lee, creator of Resistance Cranes, which is something I do want to talk about because you're reviving it.
Yep. Yeah. So last year, I think right after the Trump inauguration, I, along with a couple of close friends and my husband, launched a fundraiser. It's a 24-hour fundraiser in which we folded 1,000 paper cranes with a band of merry volunteers. And Sandie, you were one of those volunteers. And the goal was to raise money for organizations that helped immigrants and refugees. And we were successful in folding 1,000 paper cranes in 24 hours and also raising $10,000. So we want to do it again this year. And we found a place. It's the Beam Center in Red Hook. We'll be hosting it in October. It'll be October 19th to October 20th. Same premise, 24 hours, 1,000 paper cranes, and our goal is to raise $10,000 for organizations that help refugees and immigrants.
That's amazing. And I'll definitely plug all of that on all of this podcast social, and we'll talk about that more. Yeah, I went right after a Run the Jewels concert. It was like 2 a.m. when
you guys were the late night shift, which was so clutch.
And I was so tired. It was like one of those tired where you're just so tired you don't know what you're doing anymore. But it was just like a mechanical of like, I'm here and I'm like hoping somehow. Because at the Run the Jewels concert, there was like all these frat guys too. So I was just like, ugh, that was not what I wanted to experience.
It was a really, really like January, February of last year was just kind of such an emotionally fraught time. And I think people really responded to the fundraiser because I think everyone was at a loss. Like we needed to do something. It's a year and a half later, and it's still, I don't know, that feeling still remains for me. So hoping that, you know, people still feel like people aren't burnt out. Like I totally get it. Like right now people are just, it's just been an intense year and a half. And I'm hoping people still like want to come out. It's fun. Like on
it
it's
is
a lot
super
of fun, but
yeah.
also feel like you're kind of doing something meaningful.
Yeah.
So it's resistancecranes.com. You can visit the website and learn more details about the fundraiser. If you're in the New York area, you should definitely come out and volunteer and fold some paper cranes. You don't have to know how to fold paper cranes. I will teach you. It's really easy to learn. And any time that you can commit is well appreciated.
Exactly. And you get to meet a lot of cool people while you're there, even if you are sleep deprived.
Yes. But you also can come during like daylight hours too.
You don't have to come at 2 a.m. I just did because it was convenient for me.
But like, again, yes. But if you are available late night, that's when it's just me and a few other people keeping the light burning, and we're also very sleep deprived. So any help at those hours is much appreciated.
Yes, please come. Yay. So yeah, who are we talking about today?
So I wanted to talk about Anna May Wong, and I wasn't sure she was a hidden enough figure, but then I was like, well, so I was telling my husband Matthew about it, and he's like, who's that? And so I was like, okay, I will talk about her. She's considered the first Hollywood, Asian American Hollywood star, probably the only Asian American Hollywood star. And star might be a little too generous. I think the writer Anne Helen Peterson said demi-star. And the reason she says that is she had all the goods. Like she was beautiful.
So
she
pretty.
Had such charisma. She was a really talented actress. But because of the discrimination she faced in Hollywood at that time, the roles that were offered to her were, were not great. Yeah. And so she really never had the opportunity to kind of fulfill the potential that she had. But I think, so I wanted to talk a little bit, I wanted to talk about Hollywood, and I wanted to talk about an Asian American operating in Hollywood. And there's not a lot, like no one that kind of achieved the fame that she did. So that's who I want to talk about.
Yes, let's get started, because I only heard about Anna May Wong 2 years ago, and it was because I was in the MoCA Museum of Chinese in America. It's in Chinatown in New York. And I remember seeing her pictured in that exhibit and being like, who is this gorgeous human?
She's stunning.
So beautiful. And I was just like, I had no idea that it's just one of those things where I have been brainwashed to believe that only white people existed for the longest time. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I had no idea that people who looked like me and were like me existed in Hollywood back in 1920s.
She started in the 20s.
Yeah. She looked like a flapper girl in the picture I saw.
Yeah, she definitely cultivated that image. So she was born in 1905 in Los Angeles. She's American born, and she's a third generation Asian American. Her grandparents were in the country in 1855. So that was also really surprising to me, because most, when I think about Asian Americans, I always think about second generation, kids, or their parents were the ones that immigrated. That's really, when I look around at my friends, like that's their experience. But the Asian Americans have been in the country for a long time. And
yes, so they have.
She was super American. and she grew up in Los Angeles, saw movies being filmed. She grew up on the outskirts of Chinatown. So Chinatown stood in for China in a lot of Hollywood films back then. So she got her start playing as an extra in some movies that were filming around her neighborhood. And then when she was 17, she got her big break in a movie called The Toll of the Sea, which was a silent film adaptation of the Madame Butterfly story, except it's set in China. So she plays a character called Lotus Flower who discovers a white man washed up on the shore. Run, girl. Run. It's no good.
Don't save him.
Yeah. Well, so she saves him and they fall in love.
Yes.
And then, of course, he promises that he will stay with her, but then he breaks that promise and goes away to America, I assume. I haven't seen the film. She's heartbroken. She has a child, and then he returns with his wife, and yes, drama ensues. And at the end, she ends up, sacrificing herself. Like she gives her child to the new wife, so he can have a better life. And then at the end of the film, she drowns herself. It's implied that she drowns herself because she's so heartbroken. Wow. So that was her start. And it was a really popular film at the time. She got a lot of great press because she was actually a decent actress, and she was, had screen presence, and she was beautiful. So she was, the self-sacrificing, naive, gentle Chinese woman. Douglas Fairbanks saw that film, and he's like, I have to cast her in my next film. So he was looking for somebody to play the Mongol slave in his film, Thief of Baghdad. So she automatically goes from playing like this butterfly character to this dragon lady, where she's this handmaiden that's trying to lure the lead, Douglas Fairbanks, away from his true love. So those are kind of her two first major roles, and those are indicative of the types of roles she was offered throughout her entire career. Yeah. She was either like this really demure Chinese woman or this villainous, dragon lady. Those were the types of roles that she was offered. She also was a fashion icon. So she was a darling of the fan magazines. They loved her. She was different, right? She was exotic. They hadn't seen anybody like her before. And she also complicated the idea of what an Asian person was because she was American. So you could see when you're reading some of the fan magazines back then, they're really struggling with this concept of a person can be Chinese, but also magically at the same time, an American. Wow. So that was, they were really struggling with that back then. But I think that added to her allure. And so she was covered a lot in the media. And she cultivated this image of a flapper. So she was really glamorous. And so she was really well known at the time, but that fame never translated into better roles. People love to cast her in their films to add what they call exotic atmosphere, but if there was a lead role that was Asian, she was sometimes considered too Chinese for that role. So she could never win. Another thing that really, really hindered her rise to stardom was the anti-miscegenation laws, which said it affected Hollywood films because as a Chinese woman, she could not play a love interest across a white male, even if he was playing an Asian character. So that really limits your ability to play romantic leading women if you can't make out with your leading man. So she was never offered those roles. So she got tired pretty quickly of Hollywood, and towards the end of the 20s, she decided to go to Europe. So Europe was a little bit more liberal and accepting of that time. I would say a little bit. I don't think the roles she got were that much more complex or better, but she was celebrated differently. Like she was feted by directors. She was allowed to openly maintain friendships with her co-stars. So she worked in Germany. She worked in the UK. And she continued to get a lot of good press around her roles. So she became well known in the Europe scene, and then Hollywood was looking for European stars, and they were like, "Oh, Anna May Wong." And so they tried to lure her back to Hollywood, and they gave her slightly better roles, but only marginally better roles. And then in 1935, I think, The Good Earth, which is a Pulitzer Prize winning book by Pearl S. Buck, they were casting for that film. And it was like, had her name written all over it because it was about a Chinese family, had a Chinese leading role, had complex characters. And she was like the only well-known Chinese American actress working in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. She could act. But of course, they decided not to cast her. They decided to cast a German actress called Louisa Rainer.
No.
Yes. And so
the first Scarlett Johansson.
Yes, the first ScarJo, Louisa Rainer. No, she's probably not the first ScarJo, but it was a huge blow. Like this was a prestige project. You know, like you're looking for, an actress that can act and is Chinese, and hello, I'm here. And instead they offered her this secondary character. I think her name was Lotus, who is, it's like a house servant that seduces the main character and becomes his second wife. Anyway, she was like super offended, was like, hell no. And she took off for China after that. So she left. She was like done with Hollywood at that time, took off for China. She had a complicated relationship with China as well, because at that time she was well known in China, but she was kind of like whenever she was in a new film, the headlines in China was like Anna May Wong loses face for China, because her characters were like, had loose morals, were very sexualized. And so she was considered too Western for Chinese media. Mm-hmm. So she had a complicated relationship with China as well.
Oh my gosh, this just sounds like real life.
Yeah, she couldn't win anywhere. Yeah. She couldn't win anywhere. This is around World War II. So she was really involved in trying to kind of aid the Chinese cause against the Japanese invasion. She continued to work in movies. She did a lot of cabaret. She did vaudeville. She did theater. Going into the 40s and 50s, she starred in a lot of B movies, but she was never really getting any prime roles until 1951, which I thought this was really fascinating. She was the first Asian American to star as a lead in her own show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So whenever, you think, if you were to ask anybody, like, who's the Asian American to have her own show, I think a lot of people would say Margaret Cho.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
But no, the first one was Anna May Wong in 1951, where she had a show written specifically for her called The Gallery of Madame Liu Song. And I read a Vulture article about it, and it sounds amazing. So she is a woman that owns an international gallery, but she also solves murder mysteries.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God.
What?
That is so my jam.
Yeah.
So the sad thing about it is there's no archival evidence of the show. It was... No. I know. It's only like hearsay, and there's like a few scant reviews about the show. The reviews aren't great. It was canceled after 10 episodes. It was also put on the Dumont network. I've never heard of this television network, but it was one of the lesser networks. It wasn't ABC, NBC, or CBS. So Dumont sounded really interesting. They're the first network to have a TV game show. They're the first network to have a soap opera. So they're really experimenting with form because they were trying to differentiate themselves. And so that's probably why they took the leap to cast Anna May Wong in a show and set it around her character. But it lasted 10 episodes. It was canceled. There's no archival evidence because in the 70s, there was a legal dust up over who owned the archives, and the Dumont lawyers, I think, loaded up a couple of semis with like all the videotapes and the all the episodes of their entire archive, and they dumped it in like the upper New York Bay. So it's floating around somewhere in the waters of New York Bay.
Maybe one day they'll discover that. Kind of like they've discovered like a sea of plastic in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, there's always that hope that like one I don't know, kinescope, I think, or I don't know one film canister survived, or a script survived somewhere and somebody finds it in their attic. But for now, it's all people kind of oral history. And then there's a few reviews that have been printed about it. And that's all that remain of like this land, this groundbreaking television show.
I know. And I've never heard of that because
I'd never
the first
heard of
one
it.
is always Margaret Cho, and like it didn't do well at the time either. And then it's fresh off the boat. And that's it.
Wow. But there was more. I mean, when I was reading about it, there's actually other television shows, and they all star Pat Morita. So he had a bunch of television vehicles that never really took off, but he had a bunch in the 80s. So there are like a scant few other, but Margaret Cho is the most famous one, I think, that we know of.
Yeah.
But that made me really sad when I was reading about the gallery of Madame Liu-song, because I was like, oh, that sounds like an amazing show. It was probably not, execution wise, was probably not great, but.
That's like a show that I would watch today.
Yeah, the premise sounds really, really exciting. So that made me, it made me think a lot about archives because there are two early Anna May Wong movies, the Toll of the Sea and one called Piccadilly, which they were shown in the 20s and the 30s, and then people didn't see it for a long time until they were restored in the 80s and after. So that to me is kind of interesting, that how history comes back. Yeah. Right. So Toll of the Sea was released in 1922, and then I think UCLA restored it from a film negative in 1985, and that's when people were able to see it again. And I'm not sure when Piccadilly, it's a British film, and that was restored by the British Film Institute. But so maybe one day we will see something from the Gallery of Madame Liu-song.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be so cool to see.
Yeah, so I love how like there is hope that history can come alive again. Mm-hmm. But it's also interesting, like we wouldn't know much about Anna May Wong without like these restoration efforts going on. So.
Yeah. So kudos to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do great work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please continue. But yeah, so that was, it makes me sad. Like she had all the goods. Like, you've seen pictures of her. Yeah. I mean, she had mega star power. Yeah. And could only go so far. And
what happened? So after the show got canceled, what happened after that?
So she died fairly young. She died when she was 56.
Oh, wow.
So when is that? So I think she was in a couple other movies. And then she died in California from a heart attack. So I don't know much about her personal life, but I get the sense reading that she either partied hard or, she leaned on alcohol a lot to kind of deal with things.
Yes, so I get it.
Yeah. So she died. Yeah. 56 is really young.
That is really young.
Of a heart attack. And I think, so
she really held out for a long time. I mean, she tried so many avenues, Europe, China. I think I would have just given up. I'm just like, this is not worth it.
Really. And what I also really like about her is that she took these roles. I mean, she popularized the dragon lady stereotype and the butterfly stereotype, but she was well aware of that. And so like she got her start playing those roles, and then she really worked to try to subvert those roles later on in her life, turning down stuff, really only taking roles that portrayed Chinese Americans in a positive light. But the projects that she got they were like B-type projects. She never really got offered prestige projects. So she was really well aware of the impact that her being the lone representative of her community and culture, what that meant. And tried her best, given the constraints of the time, to do what she could to kind of put Chinese Americans in a better light.
Yeah, that's like another reason to turn to alcohol. A huge burden of representation, which is something we still feel today with like anything we do. And like people like Ken Jeong, right? In Hangover, how like we were so angry at him. And I remember that like everyone hated him at the time because of that. And I don't even know what the reaction for Asian Americans living in the 1920s, if they felt anything.
I don't, it's hard to say. I know, like, well, from what I've read, it was Chinese. Like I've read about the Chinese reaction because they, at that time, they didn't, I think the Hong Kong cinema industry wasn't what it was today. So like she was also their only kind of representation to the world. And so they were not really pleased with kind of the over-sexualized characters that she played.
I mean, what are your thoughts on like the burden of representation? Do you find yourself feeling frustrated with like Asian American actors who take on those stereotypical roles?
No, I mean, I don't fault them. Like, you have to pay the bills and that's what's available to you. It really is more the studios, right? Like I was reading recently about Joy Luck Club, right? And it's been derided so much because it was the only instance of a film that portrayed Asian American like lives. And so, like, you know, there was a lot of criticism against it. It's like, well, you know, it's not portraying all Asian American lives. It's like, well, why does it have to? Right? So I don't know. I'm conflicted. If an Asian American takes a role that is stereotypical, I feel for them because you have to pay the bills and, you know, you don't get cast in more projects unless you have like a resume, right? But at the same time, I wish the roles the roles weren't as stereotypical. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know how to solve that right now other than to have more projects featuring Asian Americans playing all types of roles, playing the villain, playing the hero, playing, you know, the geeky sidekick, playing the jock.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the problem is that Hollywood is predominantly white at the end of the day still. Yeah. And like there needs to be more people of color behind the camera and everything. And that's hard to get into. The room is hard to get into.
Yeah. Greenlighting the projects. I'm curious how it'll change because China is such a huge market.
Yeah.
For box office dollars.
Yeah.
But we've talked about this where, like, you know, how Asian audiences respond to to whitewashing versus Asian American audiences respond to whitewashing. It's very different.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I feel like, you know, when we had ScarJo, you know, she, what was it? Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
That was like the big, yeah. And if you were talking to Japanese audiences, they're like, yeah, whatever, you know, it's for the most part, because they see themselves represented in their media. So the fact that one character is whitewashed doesn't have the same impact as it does for Asian American audiences where we see nothing.
Yeah.
And to see an Asian character being whitewashed, it's just like, you know, you've taken all opportunity away from us. Like, why couldn't you have cast, you know, a Japanese actor in that role?
Yeah. And ScarJo recently wanted to play a transgender man. Was that him?
Trans woman? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
I remember, and her response was like, very. It was not great. I mean, she dropped from that role. I think it was a man that was had transitioned to a woman, I believe.
Oh, okay, yeah. I
don't remember.
I just saw the headline and I just like kept scrolling because I was like, I don't care anymore.
Repeat offender ScarJo.
Yeah, it's gotten to a point where like when whitewashing happens or when like any sort of erasure happens, I just start laughing because I'm just like, at what point do studios ever learn? And I don't know. I just don't think they do. And now with like things like Crazy Rich Asians doing so well, now they're like, oh my God, we need more Asians in Hollywood. And it's just like, I think we've been telling you that. We've been telling you that we want representative and diverse roles. Like, we want to see people of color on screen. Like, we're just tired of the same fucking story of a mediocre white man going through an existential crisis over and over again. And that's
Amen.
what usually wins the Oscars. Yeah.
Well, what I hope... So, like, the Joy Luck Club was a critical hit when it was released. And, I mean, it made... a decent profit, but then we didn't have any other film for like 25 years. So I hope Hollywood has learned its lesson. And, you know, well, I think sequels have been greenlit for Crazy Rich Asians. Yeah. So
that would be good.
But we need more than Crazy Rich Asians.
There are other types of Asians, like a lot of broke ones.
Yeah. Did you like Crazy Rich Asians?
I loved it. It was my favorite thing in the world. Garrett loved it and he cried during it. It was just it felt so good to be seen. Mm-hmm. And I think that resonated with so many audiences. Even if you weren't Asian American, it was just like such a good film. I don't know how else to describe it.
Excuse me.
No, it's okay. I really liked it, and I totally understand the criticism that it didn't represent all Asian Americans and all Asians. But we're trying, you know. I actually got really annoyed with that because I'm just like, but this isn't. Yeah,
it's one film.
It's one film. We're trying.
It really shouldn't represent. I mean, that would be such a mess of a film if it somehow represented.
Right, exactly.
Every single Asian American experience.
Yeah. So, you can't make everyone happy at the end of the day.
To the Asian American actors out there, like, taking roles, I say continue. I mean, I don't know. You got to pay the rent. You got to be out there. You know, we need to see your faces on the screen, and hopefully, slowly, the roles that you get offered are less stereotypical.
But Anna May Wong was like usually in silent films, right?
Well,
like, does she have an accent? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
in her
she
films.
started out in silent films, and then, like in the 30s onward, like she worked through the 50s, and that was another thing. I think that was another thing that made her kind of a curiosity to people. Is like, she's clearly an Asian woman, but she has an American accent, and so that was kind of mind blowing for people.
Trust me, it's still mind-blowing to a lot of people in 2018.
I think that just added to her allure a little bit. Was just like, she's clearly not one of us, but she speaks like us, you know? She had a beautiful voice, actually. Like, and just very... I texted you. I watched, what was it? When Were You Born? Which is also another murder mystery where she solves murders using astrology. It's amazing. But she has like this really stately, like poised, you know, calm, just a really mesmerizing voice. Like, she had a really great voice too. So she had it all. And it's just a real shame that she's just not more well known. And that she wasn't in better movies. Yeah. Because some of them are pretty, like, what was I watching? I was watching A Study in Scarlett. She was the villain in one of the Sherlock Holmes movies. And I mean, you could tell right from, because she had like, you know, she would pause and she'd have like the super villainous face on. And so it was kind of hilarious. She gave good face too. So, but she was... It's a shame.
It really is. And I'm surprised there hasn't been like a biopic about her.
Well, with the success of Crazy Rich Asians, I've been seeing tweets about Constance Wu. They're like, "Oh, you should do Anna May Wong."
I could so see her as Anna May Wong with that. Yeah,
she'd be great.
It. Yeah,
she'd be great.
She would be so good. Constance Wu, if you're listening to this, please do it.
Yeah, I think it's but hopefully they cast a Chinese person as Anna May Wong. I'm sure they would do something really random. Like, hopefully we've gone past Yellowface.
I hope so. It's interesting you bring back, because earlier you were talking about how wait, was this before we started recording? I don't remember because we talked a lot before we recorded too. About how like sometimes even though you know it's wrong, but you still like enjoy it and laugh at. Was that, did we talk about that?
I don't remember. Did I think I said that at the beginning. Yeah. Problematic. I mean, like, I mean, there, so much media out there has something that's wrong with it that if you had to wait for the most perfect, like, you know, non-problematic, there'd be nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it reminded, when you were talking about Yellowface, it reminded me of Chris Lilly. He's an Australian comedian, and he's most well known for Summer Heights High, which is where he plays 3 different characters: a drama school teacher, a high school bitch, and like this punk kid, basically. And he like interchanges those characters, and it's really funny. But he has another one called Angry Boys. And in that, he plays a Japanese mom, a rapper from LA, a black rapper from LA, and just this random Australian kid that has a twin. And I remember watching that years ago and finding it all so hilarious. But like, of course, when I zoom out and I'm talking about it now, I'm like, oh shit, that really was fucking awful.
Yeah.
But like, I think if I go back and watch it, like, I could still find like the humor in it. And it's like a weird thing that I have to grapple with of like, oh shit, like I found Yellowface and Blackface funny. And like also like disability, like what is that? Where you pretend to have a disability. That's also a type of erasure. That happened in the most recent movie that was disappointing. Sierra Burgess is a loser.
I know. I just watched that. It was terrible.
Yeah,
I
wish
I
she
had
like
high hopes.
pretended to be deaf.
Yeah, that was so awkward. I had high hopes because it had the romantic lead from To All the Boys I Loved. I was like, so I was hoping for a repeat experience. I mean, I think so we were talking about white fragility. I think that's where I brought it up, where like when you get defensive about something, it's like, oh, you know, well, I didn't know at that time. Or for me, like Aquafina was like, I didn't think she was doing a black scent. I didn't think she was like, well, okay, let's take a step back. And okay, she was. And what does that say about you? It's like, maybe you need to kind of grow your awareness in some ways. But you can still, I think you can still enjoy things while also, you know, being mindful and interrogating what that means about your worldview and being better the next time, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're always learning, and like no one's ever perfect.
Yeah, I think that's the way to think about it when somebody raises something. So I think defensiveness is a good red flag to yourself. Like when you start to feel defensive, okay, like get over it for a moment and then like stop and listen. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard to do.
It is really hard to do. Yeah. I've actually sort of like taken myself out of conflicts and situations like that in the last 2 years since the election. Because I literally just can't handle it anymore. I can't handle like defensiveness when I'm trying to speak about my community to usually white males.
That's fair. You have to take care of yourself. Like it's not on you to educate other people. Yeah,
because there's this whole like call to action after the election of like, oh, we have to build a bridge of empathy. And I was just like, no, I'm going to burn that bridge very quickly.
No, why aren't they building that bridge? Like,
yeah, exactly.
That's my feeling on it. No, I know like it feels a lot like turn the other cheek in many ways. And I'm just, for me, distancing myself was the way I could kind of get through it. Yeah. Emotionally and mentally. So that was the way for me. But I always felt like it was like white liberals saying that. It wasn't people of color.
White liberals.
It definitely wasn't people of color being like, we need to build a bridge of empathy. No, we don't. We need to protect ourselves right now. I wish I'd Googled this before, but that book on white fragility, where it comes from a diversity trainer, and one thing that stuck out about one of the articles she had written was she was talking to, like, you know, Black people she's working with. It's like, what would make your life easier? And it's just like, if white people could just own it and just be like, yep, like, and just shut up and listen, that would be revolutionary. That's all you have to do. You know, like, if somebody charges, it says that thing you did, that little, you know, that interaction you had was uncomfortable and a little racist, just stop. It doesn't, you know, that's all it was. Like, and do better next time. Yeah. That would be revolutionary if we could just stop and listen and just do better. Like, that's all. It doesn't have to be any more than that. And that would be revolutionary.
Yes, it would be. And also just admitting, all of us admitting we all have implicit biases.
Of course. There's so much anti-Black racism in the Asian community. Like,
oh
so
my God,
so
much. And that's something that frustrates me about the Asian American community, is like, we don't talk about it, and we need to. We need to discuss it, and we need to own up to it too. And I don't know, that's the only way we can move forward. But instead, it becomes a conversation most of the time about, like, oh, we need to look out for ourselves because, like, the Black community would never do that for us. And it's just like this whole, like, toxic fucking debate about that, instead of, like, how we could all band together and dismantle white supremacy. I have so many feelings about the Asian community.
So, yeah, I think what you say, like, everybody has implicit biases, and it's good when you're confronted with them. Like, it makes you a better person. So we're always improving. We're not perfect. And so like the Awkwafina thing, where I was like, oh my gosh, she was so hilarious. And then I was reading all this stuff on Twitter and on Facebook, and I was like, oh, wow. Like, maybe it was a little racist, and I like something that was a little racist, and you know.
Yeah, I still don't know how I feel about the Awkwafina thing. That's the thing. I mean, I'm very, very torn about it. Yeah. But I mean, she definitely switches it up. And, like, I recognize that too. Like, in interviews, she's a different person. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, her persona, like, she has a persona.
Yeah, she has a persona.
Right. And then in interviews, I guess it's her kind of more like, I'm an actor persona versus, like, her Awkwafina persona. Yeah. So it's definitely something that an act that she performs. Yeah. But yeah, I'm conflicted too. Like, so it was more like, it made me pause and really kind of assess, like, how I was relating to the character, and it, you know, it made me just kind of run a check on myself. Like, is there anything that I'm laughing at that, you know, that I shouldn't be laughing at? Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I don't know how we got to this topic. We were talking about Anna May Wong for a long time, and then, like, it just, like, shifted to I
this.
Think we when I came in, we were talking about white liberals, so, and then white fragility, so.
Which all relates to Anna May Wong, because white liberals tend to be in media.
True. Yeah. And they never cast her in anything that was worthy of her talents, and that is a shame. But hopefully, I mean, Constance Wu, like, she's a movie star.
She totally is. And I fucking love her. And here's another thing I don't like about the Asian community. Sorry, I'm just disparaging my own community. But as soon as people found out she dated a white man, everyone was against her. And it made me so angry.
Really?
Because
I didn't even hear about that.
Yeah, because it reduced her, and it reduced her as an Asian woman to just her relationship and, like, who owns her, which man owns her. And I hate that conversation. I'm starting to really, really hate it. Because she is a champion for Asian American representation. She always speaks out against any whitewashing, any erasure. And she's just an overall badass, and I love her. So I really hope she plays Anna May Wong, but that would be really hard to watch all the stereotypes that Anna May Wong had to go through.
But we can have 2 Asian American superstars in Hollywood too.
We can have multiple.
I really want to see the John Cho Searching.
Me too.
Well. I'm mad about him. He should be more of a star. Like, he is fantastic. Did you ever watch that television show Selfie?
Yes, I loved it.
He was so good in that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, just such a romantic lead. Like, he should be in romantic comedies.
Yeah.
With Constance Wu.
Yes. Yeah. It's like such a shame because Selfie also got canceled.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, and it was so good and very romantic, very cute. Which just shows that Asian Americans can be anything. Just cast them.
Well, cast them in roles that are worthy of their talents.
Yes.
Yes. I'm still kind of ruminating on your question, like, should Asian Americans play roles that are stereotypical? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like, gotta get out there, but at the same time,
I'm kind of just like, don't do it.
Yeah.
Just boycott it, you know?
I'm afraid when you boycott it, then they're just like, well, those roles are so disposable anyway that they like being an Asian is not integral to that character really in my mind, that they'll just switch it up and cast somebody else.
Yeah, but then that goes back to the question of like, was it really for an Asian American person or was it just like a token?
Oh,
Diversity.
totally a token.
Yeah.
Like,
and like, should you be a token all the time? Yeah, it's just so complicated. Yeah, I don't know either. But I would hope artists keep their integrity more often than not. I understand you have to pay the bills. Trust me, I'm broke as fuck. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a personal thing too of just like, well, I would rather keep integrity and like this like what I want to produce as art too. Right. But it all depends on how you look at acting and how you look at art. For me, I think art is political always. But some people don't, you know? And some people are like, it's just a job.
I don't know what we need. I'm hoping, with China as a bigger market and they're also financing more projects, that maybe that has a trickle-down effect. I haven't seen it yet. Like, you kind of see all these ensemble projects where all of a sudden there's this random Chinese person that's inserted in the cast. And it's because it's, financing from China. So like Pacific Rim, the new one had like a random Asian. I did because I love the first one. Yeah. Or what was it? Great. The Matt Damon.
Oh, I didn't watch that either. God. But I love Andy Lau. Andy Lau is like a huge crush of mine since childhood.
But I mean, I watched the first 20 minutes of it because it was on HBO. It's terrible.
Oh no.
It is terrible. Well, I mean, we knew that, right? Yeah. Like the reviews were horrible, but.
Yeah, I mean, I try to watch anything Andy Lau is in, and because of the whole white savior, I was just like, it's okay, I don't need to watch this. I felt really bad because I think Andy Lau is such a phenomenal actor. Like, if you see him in, like, he was in the original Infernal Affairs. Yeah. And the way, this is why I hated The Departed, because they sort of bastardized that whole storyline of Infernal Affairs, because it wasn't about, like, the violence and, like, being a good cop or whatever the fuck the American version was, which was just a lot of explosions and violence. It was more about like the story of morality and story of a descent into hell on earth, which I loved. And I loved the metaphors that they played out in that movie. So that obviously did not happen in the American version. So what are you going to do?
Watch the original.
Yeah, watch the fucking original. It's so fucking good because it's so, I'm going to go on a whole tangent of like Chinese cinema. There are complex characters and you see complex emotions being done. And I just feel like if more Americans like watch foreign films, they would understand like, oh, we can emote and we have human emotions, and we also go through complicated life situations. We can also philosophize on different things. But instead, when we're brought into American cinema, it's just like this one thing of like, oh, I'm a dorky best friend. And that's basically it. Which sucks. And that's also a shame. Bringing it back to Anna May Wong.
Anna May Wong. So she's sort of popularized the two original tropes of the butterfly and the dragon lady, but I think she tried to kind of subvert that later on.
Yeah.
So again, like what should she have done? You know?
Yeah. I don't know what she should have had, like, social media. I mean, I love and hate social media, but what I loved about social media is that it did bring voice to the people of, like, what we want. And, like, I don't know. Yeah, I feel really bad for her because she did not have the support.
But I think she's been, that's why I wasn't sure if she was a hidden figure, because I think there's been a lot of focus on her in recent years. You know, there's been her old movies have been restored. I think, she was just such a glamorous figure that I think that, and there's been a lot of I think MoMA ran a retrospective on her. So she's gotten a lot of attention in recent years, which is interesting and also exciting. So I hope, I don't know. I think, like you said, you know, Asian Americans have been telling Hollywood, telling media companies that we want to see ourselves in the media, and hopefully they're starting to listen. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I have, like, no hope in Hollywood. I'm just like,
well, it feels like money talks, and it feels like anything that is put out there that represents Asian Americans has to do well, and that's just such a heavy burden. But that's really the only thing that they listen to, right? Is, like, money.
Yeah.
So Crazy Rich Asians did really well, therefore we get 2 more, right? But do we get anything else other than Crazy Rich Asians?
Yeah. Well, Searching did really well too on opening weekend, which is great. And I don't know what else is coming out. I know we had the whole Asian August, and I just, like, kept watching To All the Boys I Loved Before, like, on repeat over and over again, because it was so cute.
And they tried to whitewash that character too.
I know. And that goes back to, like, the whole thing with everyone hated Jenny Han for writing that story too, because the Asian community was not, mostly Asian men. And this is, like, a whole other topic of misogyny within our community too that needs to be addressed, but we don't. Of, like, oh, like, why is the romantic lead a white man? And it's just, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, well, Asian women don't belong to anyone. That's what I want to say. But if I say that, which I have said before online, and I've been harassed
lambasted.
Online. Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, these, like, trolls online will take your personal profile picture. It's been done to so many Asian women. And unfortunately, I was one of them too, where they take your personal profile and they en masse share it in these, like, forums that aren't the red pill, but, like, kind of an Asian man version of the red pill. And they'll, like, say things like, oh, she's a race traitor and she only likes pink dick, and just, like, awful fucking things that shows that all they care about is having Asian women belong to them. And it's just like, we don't fucking belong to anyone, and we shouldn't just be reduced to our relationships, because we're so much more than our romantic relationships. Yeah. I can talk about that forever.
Oh, I'm sorry that happened to you.
It's okay. It's happened to a lot. Celeste Ng was the last person it happened to. Yeah. I mean, it's not okay. Like, I'm not saying it's okay that it happened, but I'm just like,
you're not alone.
I'm not alone in
which
that,
is
and
also really sad.
Yeah. It's more like I'm just frustrated that we haven't had conversations about sexism and misogyny in our own communities. And this is another reason why intersectional feminism is important, and why white feminism does not solve that problem.
Right. Well, it's hard to look inward.
Yeah.
So
it is.
It's hard to kind of, yeah. Ugh. So I agree. Social media is such a minefield, but I also learn a lot from it.
Yeah. I think recently I need to get off Twitter. It's really toxic. Even on the left, I'm just like, I can't. It's just, like, shouting at each other all the time. And even if I've, like, blocked all Trump supporters, even when I just see just progressives talk amongst each other, it's really disheartening.
Yeah, no, my feeds are, like, highly filtered. So I find it really, really enlightening and heartening because I follow kind of just people that are like that are all, they've taken it upon themselves to educate people. And, I love them for that. They don't have to do that. But I learn, so.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. But yeah, it's highly felt. I mean, after Trump was elected, I did a thorough cleansing of like all my social media feeds because yuck. Yeah. I was just getting like heart attack level, rage every day, which is not healthy.
It's not.
2017 was like a really, really bad year for mental health.
Yeah, I think 2017 and like a large part of 2018 was really bad for me too. But I also was in a really weird environment. Like I was transitioning out of a career in tech and I was like trying to launch a career in art and like being more creative, only to find that like the art scene is sometimes just as fucking annoying. And like trying to balance that and grapple with that too. So on top of the politics that come with art. So yeah, 2017 to 2018 were meh. I mean, I feel like the summer of 2018 was great because we were saying that was our summer of healing. Yeah.
We talk a lot about our anxieties and healing.
Yeah, I did a lot of like healing. I did a lot of like healing through food. I did a lot of yoga. I did a lot of therapy. And I just started hanging around more women of color. And that has been actually the most healing part about it, was speaking with other women of color and sort of recognizing that like we all go through the same experiences, and also like acknowledging that like a lot of the experiences we go through are like gaslighting experiences too, where we're made to feel crazy all the time, and we're made to feel like, oh, was I being too sensitive, or like did I do something wrong to cause XYZ reaction?
I made somebody else uncomfortable. Yeah,
exactly.
So clearly I'm the bad person here.
Yes. And learning that it's okay to take up space. And I think, being with women of color is just like my healing. And that has been so good.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about self-care and also collective care as a form of self-care. Like how can you take care of others that are in the same boat as you, as a way of making yourself, like healing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. What other healing things have you gone through in the summer?
Well, I mean, a lot of introspection, like learning to say no, being patient with myself. I think I just had a baby. So it's been kind of a learning experience, like seeing him develop and go learn things and struggle with things at his own pace. And then telling myself like, you're really kind with him and you're really encouraging with him. And, you trust that he will like make that leap and he will learn and he will like grow. Like, why can't you turn that towards yourself? Like you're struggling with something. So I've been struggling with things for a while and beating myself up for like always coming back to like beating myself up over the same things, or, ruminating over the same things. And then, that's okay. Like asking for help when I need it, but it's okay for me to struggle because, and it's okay because I can trust myself. Like I'll continue working through it and I'll continue getting better. So having faith in myself and trusting myself it's been hard, but I think doing that has been really helpful for me because this year's just been a lot of change going on. So when I had my baby, it was like 12 weeks of like baby bliss where I was in a total bubble. And then I rejoined the working force, and all the anxieties that I'd had before I had baby and all the kind of self-doubt I had came like slamming back into me. And so that was... I came back to work and I thought I was going to bounce back 100% and be like, ready to like be my old self again. And I'm a completely different person, and I'm still figuring out who that new person is. So.
Yeah, it's hard to embrace change. I think people hate change. Like even people around you hate when you do change and grow. because everyone expects things to be the same comfortable thing all the time. But I'm learning that there's so much, I don't know if grace is the right word, like grace and beauty in change.
Oh, yeah.
And like embracing that this summer has just been, I think, the best part. And like, instead of trying to resist it and trying to go back to my old self, like you were saying, because I think I was trying to go back to my old self for the longest time. And I was just like, but I don't even like that version of myself anymore. So why do I keep trying to go back to that?
Yeah.
You know? And just learning to be patient with myself too. Yeah.
So hard.
It is really hard, but it's so worth it.
But also, I think what you're doing, surrounding yourself around people that aren't harmful, I think is really, and are supportive is really, really key.
Yes.
So, I was talking to you earlier. I won't go into removing myself from a situation where it was I always remove
myself.
Toxic personalities.
I always remove myself now from toxic situations, and like, I don't know if that will be harmful later for me, and like, maybe I need to be more resilient, but I'm just like, I don't want to deal with it. I want to be in a safe space all the time. And I don't mean in like coddled or whatever that means, but I just want to feel supported, and I want to be around people who are vulnerable and who are okay with vulnerability and okay with quote unquote more feminine qualities. And I don't want to be, because I think for the longest time, I would beat myself up for not being an aggressive person and for not being like a lean in type of person. And I felt like I was trying so hard to do that, but hating myself the entire time, and like hating the person I was becoming the entire time. And that was just, and I think 2017, 2018 was like the biggest shift of like being okay with my emotions and being okay with being vulnerable. And also being okay with leaning the fuck out.
Yeah. Taking time.
Yeah, exactly. So we are running out of time. Speaking of time, so is there anything you want to add about Anna May Wong, or just anything you want listeners to take away from the story?
I mean, I think we've covered most of everything I wanted to say. I would say watch her movies because she's amazing. I just watched When Were You Born, which I mentioned was where she solves a murder using astrology. It's amazing. I found that her films are kind of hard to find, so I was trying to watch more things, but you can check out Filmstruck. They have, I think, 6 of her films available for streaming, so you should do that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yay! I don't have an outro. It's just like not happening.